Good morning. I am Saini at the University of Canberra, and I am in my weekly conversation with Michelle Grattan. Michelle, good morning.
Hi, Deep.
What a fortnight we've had in the Parliament. The Parliament's now out until early next year, but the last 2 weeks were pretty trying for the coalition government. In 1 minute, what's your take on the goings-on?
They certainly have been trying. They're the first 2 weeks that the government has been in minority, that it's been a hung parliament. So that means that it doesn't automatically have the numbers. It is at the behest, if you like, of the minority, the crossbenchers, and it really can't set the agenda in the way it might have before. In this 2 weeks, of course, which came after the rout of the Liberal Party in Victoria, it also lost one of its Victorian members to the crossbench, which put it even further in minority after the Wentworth by-election took away its numbers. So it's struggled.
So in that situation of struggle and difficulty, in comes Malcolm Turnbull. I won't say necessarily from the dark, he's never gone to the dark. And so he made some statements that couldn't possibly be helpful for the government. He intervened in ways that didn't necessarily work, but created difficulties. Summarize that for us, because I thought that was one of the most interesting things that happened over the last couple of weeks.
He intervened in a pre-selection. Scott Morrison was feeling the need to save Craig Kelly, who's a maverick member on the right of the party, who was part of really torpedoing the energy policy and thus torpedoing Malcolm Turnbull. Now, Malcolm Turnbull didn't succeed in frustrating this effort to save Kelly, but he certainly made it more high profile. And then, hard on the heels of that, he came out and spruiked the National Energy Guarantee, which of course was at the centre of his downfall and which the government has now abandoned. And he said that the party should go back to that, which they certainly won't be anytime soon. So that was particularly unhelpful, and I do think that many members of the parliamentary party, even supporters of Malcolm Turnbull, really wish that he'd just go quiet and butt out of things, not cause trouble.
But that's not our tradition here, is it?
Well, it's certainly not the tradition of a number of ex-prime ministers that have been hanging around. And of course, Malcolm Turnbull is still very, very angry about what happened to him. And everything that's happened since the coup against him has really reinforced the message that it wasn't a sensible thing to replace the leader. So the opinion polls have gone sour. The federal situation is recognised as a factor in the Victorian disaster for the Liberals. So Malcolm Turnbull sort of feels both angry and vindicated in his judgment that this was all a very foolish course for his opponents to take.
So let's take a moment to pick on that, the culture of coups, and with Morrison leading this, the Liberal Party has adopted a new policy now that that if you're elected as Prime Minister and if you lead the party into a victory and you're elected Prime Minister, you will complete your term unless 2/3 of the party wants you gone. Now, how significant would that be in changing this culture of coups in Australia?
I think it's quite significant. Of course, the Labor Party adopted a similar sort of rule. The numbers are a bit different, but a similar rule some time ago, and because it had the coup culture problem. And that's certainly given stability in opposition to Bill Shorten. Now, the Liberal rule doesn't cover opposition, it's only the Prime Ministership. But I think that what it's picking up on is that Australians are really sick of what's happened over the last decade, that they want stability, and Scott Morrison is sending the message that the Liberals have heard that from the public and are responding. It's possible people might see the move as somewhat cynical, but I think more people than the sceptics will think, well, that's a good direction in which the party's going.
Yeah, the cynics aside, I do feel that this is the first time I'm seeing in a long time that government seems to be listening to people. It's
getting the message that people want stable government and they want to feel that they elect a party. Of course, they don't elect a Prime Minister directly, it's not a presidential system, but they elect a party with a particular person leading that party, and elections are very much these days focused on the leader, and that administration with that leader will go through until they next get a chance to give their judgment.
As difficult as those 2 weeks have been, it wasn't all dark clouds for the government. There were some rays of light getting through. One of them is the Labour board voting with the government on encryption bill. Finally, it was a game of chicken for a while, and finally they capitulated and voted with the government, and that bill has passed now. What is the significance of that in your mind?
That bill is designed to give the authorities a greater access to information to head off crimes involving terrorism and other very serious offences like child sex offences, for example. So it's a preventative measure, but it's also a measure that will help in running down criminals after crimes are committed. So I think it's an important measure. It is a controversial one, and it does have quite strong opponents. Now, it was passed at the end of what was an absolutely chaotic Thursday, with the government struggling to prevent a vote that it would lose on an entirely different matter, and that was an amendment that was supported by crossbenchers and by Labor that would facilitate bringing medical cases off Nauru and Manus. It did finally, by just running down the clock, avoid that vote, but in the process that was delaying this encryption bill. So there was all sorts of toing and froing, and eventually Labor blinked and put the bill through without the amendments it was pursuing, and that was because Bill Shorten took the decision he didn't want to risk being labelled one who wasn't doing everything to prevent terrorist incidents, and he just thought that it was better to have a bill that was more faulty than Labor would want than to be open to that allegation. I think that was a pretty sensible calculation at a political level.
Now, this one is not necessarily a ray of light getting through the clouds, but perhaps some reason for relief for Morrison, that Peter Dutton would not be referred to the High Court, his eligibility to sit in the Parliament. Is that a significant reason for Morrison to be relieved?
I think it is. Obviously, Labor's had a lot of trouble getting the sort of final numbers for a referral. A number of the crossbenchers support referral, but it was just getting over the line with the numbers. Peter Dutton has been actually absent for this past fortnight. He was doing something to a fence with a building or repairing, and he injured his arm quite badly, had to have it operated on, and so he's had medical leave. Probably that made it a little more difficult for Labor to get the numbers, because it would have looked slightly bad to refer him in his absence. But basically, I think one or two crossbenchers just had some doubts or thought that a number of people should be referred if Dutton was. I do think this takes pressure off this issue, because I don't think there'll be the same momentum to do that when Parliament resumes next year. I think a lot of other things will take priority, and remember, Parliament hardly sits at all actually before the election, just some 10 days.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm going to be going into 2019 with the hope that things would be better.
Well, maybe not. But certainly they'll be interesting, and certainly we've got that election bearing down on us, so that'll be a pretty exciting contest.
Yes, it surely will be, yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.